First up at number 1 is Crusader Kings 3, the grand strategy masterpiece that lets you control a medieval dynasty across centuries of political intrigue, war, and dynastic drama. Despite the enormous depth of its systems, the game runs comfortably on modest hardware, making it an ideal pick for low-end PC players who want strategic richness without demanding graphical requirements. You manage characters with individual traits, ambitions, and relationships that make every reign feel unique and unpredictable. Military campaigns, religious conflicts, and family succession crises all unfold dynamically through interconnected systems that reward long-term strategic planning. The interface is clean and readable, even on lower resolution displays. Extensive free updates and DLC have expanded the base game considerably since launch. For players who want hundreds of hours of medieval content without needing powerful hardware, this is the absolute first recommendation on any low-end PC list available today. Mount & Blade Warband takes the second spot as one of the most beloved medieval sandbox games ever made, and a title that runs on virtually any PC hardware manufactured in the past 15 years. You create a custom warrior and build influence across a contested medieval kingdom through combat, trading, diplomacy, and military command. The horseback combat system remains genuinely innovative, with momentum-based directional strikes that reward skillful mounted fighting. Siege battles, field engagements, and tournament competitions provide tremendous variety across a long campaign. The modding community has produced an extraordinary library of content that extends the game's lifespan almost indefinitely across different historical settings and fictional worlds. Multiplayer modes are still active, with a dedicated community enjoying competitive and cooperative sessions. Despite its age, the core gameplay loop is so well designed that it continues to attract new players consistently, an essential medieval game for any low-end PC player. Kingdom Come Deliverance arrives at 3 as a historically grounded medieval RPG set in Bohemia that prioritizes realism and authentic period detail over fantasy conventions. You play as Henry, a blacksmith's son thrust into the chaos of a regional war, navigating survival, combat skill development, and a branching narrative across an open countryside. The realistic combat system, using directional blocks and ripostes, has a meaningful learning curve that makes mastering it genuinely satisfying over time. Skill progression ties directly to actions performed, meaning practice in combat, stealth, or alchemy actually builds corresponding abilities organically. On lower-end hardware, the game requires some settings adjustment, but runs acceptably at medium configurations, delivering a visually impressive experience relative to its technical demands. Quest design is creative, with non-linear solutions rewarding lateral thinking and character skill investment. A deeply immersive medieval experience that stands apart from genre conventions through its commitment to historical authenticity. For Honor claims the 4th position as a close-quarters medieval combat game where knights, samurai, and Vikings clash in team-based multiplayer and story-driven campaign missions. The Art of Battle system maps attacks and blocks to directional inputs, creating a tense dual reading mechanic that rewards focus and opponent pattern recognition during combat exchanges. Graphically, the game scales reasonably well on lower hardware, with reduced settings still delivering readable and attractive combat animations. The roster of heroes across multiple factions offers substantial variety in fighting style and playstyle preference. Seasonal content updates have kept the game active and balanced, with a healthy player population available across most hours. Story campaign missions provide entertaining single-player content if competitive play is not your primary interest. The core combat philosophy of reading opponents and striking decisively connects it meaningfully to the best medieval combat game design principles available in the genre today. Chivalry 2 enters at 5 as the most entertaining large-scale medieval melee multiplayer game available on PC right now, with matches supporting up to 64 players across siege and objective-based battlefields. Chopping through enemies in massive chaotic castle assaults and field battles captures the anarchic fun of medieval warfare in a way no other game currently matches. The combat system has enough depth to reward skilled players, while remaining accessible enough for newcomers to contribute meaningfully from their first session. Character classes covering archers, vanguards, footmen, and knights each bring distinct tactical value to team engagements. On lower-end hardware, the game performs well at reduced settings, with the gameplay clarity remaining strong regardless of visual configuration. Regular content updates have added new maps and weapons, keeping the experience fresh for returning players. It is consistently one of the highest-value medieval multiplayer experiences available at its current price point on PC platforms. Mordhau takes position 6 as the more technically demanding medieval melee game compared to Chivalry 2, but still runs comfortably on mid to lower hardware configurations when settings are properly adjusted. The combat system is extraordinarily deep, with feints, morphs, footwork manipulation, and chamber parries, creating a skill ceiling that competitive players have spent years mastering. Frontline mode, with dozens of players fighting across large maps, captures the chaotic thrill of medieval battlefield engagement at impressive scale. Horse combat, ballista operation, and siege equipment add tactical variety beyond pure sword fighting. The movement system allows acrobatic approaches to combat that experienced players use to great effect in one versus many situations. Workshop content and server customization options give the community meaningful control over their experience. While the learning curve is steeper than competitor titles, the skill depth rewards investment in ways that keep dedicated players engaged for extraordinarily long periods of time across its combat systems. A Total War Saga Troy arrives at 7 as a focused strategy experience covering the legendary conflict of the Trojan War through the lens of historical possibility rather than pure myth. The dual resource and barter economy system adds complexity to campaign management that rewards careful diplomatic and economic planning between military engagements. Mythological units are present, but framed as elite human warriors and exotic beasts, rather than literal gods and monsters, giving the game a distinctive tone. On low-end hardware, the campaign map runs smoothly, and battle performance is manageable at reduced unit scales and graphical settings. 8 playable factions representing major heroes on both sides of the conflict offer different campaign starts and strategic priorities. The free launch period made this one of the most widely owned Total War titles in the library. Seasonal content added mythological DLC that expanded the roster and introduced more fantastical elements for players who prefer that direction in their ancient warfare strategy gaming experience. Stronghold Crusader 2 takes number 8 as a castle-building and siege warfare strategy game that runs effortlessly on virtually any PC hardware while delivering deep and satisfying medieval military management gameplay. You construct and defend fortifications against waves of attackers while managing resource production, population needs, and military recruitment across campaign and skirmish scenarios. The AI lords each have distinct personalities and attack patterns that create memorable recurring rivalries across the campaign trail missions. Siege mechanics involving catapults, fire weapons, tunneling, and direct assault provide tactical variety in both offensive and defensive contexts. The economic management layer connecting food, gold, and military resources requires careful balancing under pressure from persistent enemy harassment. Multiplayer allows up to 8 players in competitive and cooperative castle warfare scenarios. The game's low technical requirements make it one of the most accessible medieval strategy experiences available, and the depth of its castle design systems rewards creative architectural approaches to defensive problem-solving. Ancestors' Legacy lands at 9 as a squad-based real-time strategy game set across multiple medieval European factions, including Vikings, Saxons, Slavs, and Teutons, with a strong narrative campaign grounding its tactical gameplay. Each faction has distinct unit types, building structures, and tactical strengths that create meaningfully different playstyles across the full roster. The close-up camera perspective during battles gives the game a visceral ground-level quality that larger-scale RTS titles cannot replicate effectively. Village burning, resource raiding, and morale systems add strategic depth beyond simple unit production and attack commands. On low-end PC hardware, the game performs acceptably with reduced graphical settings, maintaining gameplay clarity throughout complex multi-unit engagements. Multiplayer is available for competitive sessions against other players. The historical grounding across each faction's campaign gives the game educational texture that enriches the fictional conflicts being portrayed across its multiple story-driven mission sequences throughout the full content library. Knight's Province arrives at 10 as an indie city builder set in a medieval feudal world that tasks you with growing a small village into a prosperous and defensible kingdom through careful resource chain management. The economic simulation is detailed, with production chains covering farming, mining, crafting, and military supply, all requiring coordinated planning to function efficiently under population growth pressure. Military recruitment and castle defense add threat management to the otherwise peaceful builder experience, with raids testing the defensive structures you have constructed. The visual style is clean and readable on lower hardware, with a top-down perspective that communicates all necessary information without demanding graphical muscle. Regular developer updates have improved and expanded the system since early access completion, with the current build representing a polished and rewarding experience. The medieval atmosphere is well realized through architecture styles and seasonal environmental changes. A deeply satisfying builder for players who enjoy methodical, economic puzzle solving, wrapped in authentic medieval presentation and gradually escalating challenge. Kenshi claims 11 as one of the most unique medieval-adjacent open-world games available, offering a brutal survival sandbox set in a post-apocalyptic world with technology frozen at a medieval level across its vast and unforgiving geography. You begin with nothing and must survive, recruit companions, build a base, and carve out a place in a world actively hostile to your existence from the very first moment. The faction system creates a living political environment where your actions have consequences across the entire map, affecting trade, alliances, and enemy attention. Base building systems are deep, allowing construction of self-sufficient settlements with full production chains, covering food, research, and military equipment. On low-end hardware, the game needs optimization, but runs adequately with the right settings, and delivers an experience with no direct equivalent in terms of emergent storytelling depth. Combat is real-time and unforgiving, with skill progression tied to actual use in the field. A genuinely singular game that rewards patience and creative problem-solving across hundreds of hours of potential engagement. Battle Brothers enters at 12 as a deep turn-based mercenary management RPG set in a medieval low fantasy world where your company of fighters navigates contracts, crises, and inevitable casualties across a procedurally generated campaign map. Permadeath applies to all brothers, making each loss meaningful and forcing constant roster management and tactical adaptation to changing personnel. The combat system on hex-based battlefields rewards careful positioning, fatigue management, and skill selection, with outcomes determined by strategy rather than luck. 3 distinct late-game crisis events reshape the campaign world and provide escalating challenges that push your company's capabilities to their limits. Trait and injury systems give individual brothers personality and history that creates emotional investment despite the game's deliberately clinical presentation style. On low-end hardware, the game runs flawlessly with minimal system requirements. The difficulty and depth make this one of the most rewarding medieval strategy experiences available, particularly for players who enjoy the roguelite philosophy of learning through repeated and iterative campaign attempts. Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous arrives at 13 as a deep and sprawling CRPG set in a dark fantasy world that borrows heavily from medieval European mythology and architecture while delivering exceptional narrative and tactical depth. The mythic power system allows your Crusader to ascend beyond mortal limits through alignment-based power choices that dramatically affect both story outcomes and combat capability. Turn-based and real-time combat modes are both fully supported, allowing different player preferences to be accommodated without compromise. The companion roster is rich with personality, and the relationship systems create genuine investment in the characters accompanying your journey. Crusade management adds a strategic layer between dungeon exploration that expands the game's scope considerably beyond pure CRPG conventions. On lower-end hardware, real-time mode runs acceptably, and turn-based mode places no meaningful strain on modest PC configurations. The writing quality across the main campaign and companion storylines is consistently excellent, making this one of the deepest narrative experiences on this entire list. Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire takes position 14 as a sequel that improves upon its predecessor in almost every measurable way, delivering a maritime medieval fantasy CRPG adventure across an island archipelago
filled with political intrigue, ancient gods, and morally complex factions. Ship combat and exploration add meaningful variety to the dungeon-focused structure of traditional CRPGs, giving the world a genuine sense of traversal and discovery. The class and multi-class system is extraordinarily deep, allowing highly personalized character builds that reward systematic thinking about ability synergies. Companion writing is among the finest in the CRPG genre, with each character having distinct worldviews that create genuine philosophical friction within the party. On low-end hardware, the game runs excellently given its isometric perspective and pre-rendered background approach to visual presentation. The narrative tackles themes of faith, imperialism, and mortality with genuine intellectual ambition, an essential CRPG recommendation for players who want deep medieval fantasy storytelling without hardware compromise.
Tyranny arrives at 15 as a morally inverted CRPG, where you serve an evil overlord who has already conquered the world and must enforce his rule across a recently defeated region, using whatever combination of cruelty and pragmatism your character embodies. The dialogue and choice systems are some of the most sophisticated in the genre, with decisions carrying genuine weight across faction relationships and narrative outcomes throughout the campaign. The Spire base building mechanic adds a satisfying management layer between story missions, with upgrades that provide meaningful mechanical benefits. Magic system is creatively designed, with player-created spells assembled from learned sign combinations that encourage experimentation and personalization. On low-end hardware, the game runs flawlessly, with isometric visuals that look attractive, without demanding modern graphics capability. The relatively shorter runtime compared to genre peers makes it an excellent entry point for players new to CRPGs who want a complete and focused experience. A uniquely dark and intellectually engaging medieval fantasy that rewards morally complex decision-making throughout its entire runtime. Divinity Original Sin 2 claims 16 as one of the highest-rated CRPGs ever made, and a game that delivers extraordinary tactical depth and narrative quality within a medieval fantasy setting that rivals anything the genre has produced. The elemental interaction system between fire, water, poison, and electricity creates emergent tactical possibilities during turn-based combat that reward creative thinking and preparation over rote execution. 4-player cooperative multiplayer allows the entire campaign to be played together, with each player controlling their own character within the shared story. The origin characters each have unique backstories and dialogue options that fundamentally change how the narrative unfolds when selected as the main protagonist. On modest hardware, the game scales reasonably, with reduced settings maintaining gameplay clarity throughout even the most complex multi-character combat encounters. Writing quality across main and companion storylines is consistently exceptional, with moral complexity woven throughout every major decision point. Absolutely essential for any CRPG fan, regardless of hardware limitations, given its extraordinary overall quality. Darkest Dungeon 2 enters at 17 as the gothic medieval roguelite sequel that expands its predecessor's formula into a road trip structure, crossing hostile landscapes between settlements rather than dungeon crawling beneath a single estate. Stress management, relationship dynamics between party members, and strategic in-stop decisions layer onto the turn-based combat, creating a deeply interconnected series of consequential choices across each run. The art direction is extraordinary, with a painted visual style that looks striking even on modest display hardware, without requiring strong graphical processing power. Each hero class has been redesigned, with more complex ability token systems that reward mastery of individual characters across repeated playthroughs. Boss encounters are spectacular in presentation and genuinely challenging in execution, requiring deep understanding of available tools and careful resource management to overcome. The narrative framework delivered through collected confessions and in-conversations adds meaningful story texture to the rogue structure. A beautifully dark and mechanically sophisticated experience that runs comfortably on most PC hardware configurations currently in widespread use. Stoneshard arrives at 18 as an open-world medieval RPG with turn-based tactical combat and deep character systems that emphasize survival, wound management, and careful resource use across a procedurally enhanced game world. Injuries have specific body part consequences, with limb damage affecting combat capability and requiring appropriate medical treatment rather than simple health restoration. The skill trees across weapon types, magic, and survival disciplines allow meaningful character specialization that rewards planning and long-term investment. Caravan management between settlements adds a logistical layer that connects individual dungeon runs to broader campaign progression goals. On low-end hardware, the game runs effortlessly, given its top-down pixel art presentation, which communicates gameplay information clearly without demanding modern graphical processing. The difficulty is substantial, and the game rewards patience and tactical deliberation over aggressive approaches to enemy encounters. Regular content updates from the active development team continue expanding the world and systems, making each return visit to the game a richer experience than the previous session provided. Wartales takes number 19 as a medieval open-world mercenary RPG that tasks you with managing a growing band of fighters across a politically fractured world, navigating contracts, moral choices, and tactical combat across turn-based battlefield encounters. The camp management between fights requires attention to food, morale, wages, and equipment maintenance, creating a satisfying resource loop that gives context to mercenary life beyond pure combat. Companion specializations across blacksmithing, cooking, and other trades add economic depth to roster management decisions. The world map has genuine open structure, allowing exploration-driven discovery of new contracts and narrative threads across different regional factions. On low-end hardware, the game performs acceptably, with the visual style being attractive without demanding strong processing capability. Multiplayer cooperative support allows up to 4 players to share the campaign experience together. The tone is grounded and mature, with moral complexity woven into contract choices and factional relationships throughout the expansive and well-realized medieval world being explored across the full campaign. Graveyard Keeper arrives at 20 as an unconventional medieval life simulation where you manage a cemetery, perform autopsies, craft equipment, and navigate a quirky cast of village characters across a charming yet darkly humorous open-ended experience. Resource gathering, crafting chains, and quest completion drive progression through a game that reveals its surprising depth gradually across extended play sessions. The humor is consistently witty, with the game constantly subverting medieval fantasy tropes in ways that keep the tone fresh across many hours of engagement. Farming, alchemy, and sermon preparation add variety to the graveyard management core, keeping daily routines from becoming repetitive. On low-end PC hardware, the game runs flawlessly with minimal system requirements, making it one of the most accessible games on the entire list. DLC expansions add fishing, tavern management, and Inquisition storylines that meaningfully extend the base game content. For players who want a relaxed but substantive medieval experience with genuine personality and humor, this is an excellent and often underappreciated recommendation worth exploring thoroughly. Going Medieval claims 21 as a colony survival builder set in a post-plague medieval world where you guide survivors in constructing a defensible settlement from nothing across a fully destructible 3-dimensional environment. The vertical building system, allowing multi-story structures with functional interior rooms, is one of the most impressive construction systems in the colony builder genre available on PC today. Settler needs covering food, rest, recreation, and social interaction all require ongoing management to maintain a productive and stable community. Raid defense, requiring strategic placement of walls, traps, and armed colonists, adds tension to the otherwise peaceful builder rhythm. On low-end hardware, the game scales well, with the voxel-based environment being computationally efficient relative to visually comparable construction games. Seasonal changes affecting crop growth and temperature management add another planning layer to long-term settlement development. The freedom of architectural expression within the medieval setting makes this one of the most creatively satisfying builder games available, and the active development continues adding meaningful content to the already substantial base experience. Manor Lords arrives at 22 as the most visually impressive medieval city builder on this list, and a game that runs reasonably well on mid to lower hardware, despite its extraordinary graphical fidelity for the genre. You guide a medieval settlement from a small hamlet toward a prosperous town, using historically accurate building placement, supply chain management, and land use planning across a beautifully rendered European countryside. The tactical battle system allows direct participation in real-time field engagements between armies when diplomatic options fail during territorial disputes with rival lords.
Seasonal crop rotation, market supply and demand simulation, and approval management from your populace create interconnected systems that reward holistic planning. The attention to historical detail in building design and settlement layout logic is extraordinary and gives the game genuine educational texture alongside its entertainment value. Developer support has been strong since launch, with updates improving performance and expanding content meaningfully. One of the most anticipated medieval games delivered on its promise and continues improving with each subsequent update release since its initial availability.
Banished takes 23 as a focused medieval village survival builder that strips the genre down to its essential systems and delivers a deeply challenging and satisfying economic puzzle within a cleanly presented rural setting. Your population of exiled citizens must establish food production, shelter, firewood, and healthcare systems that sustain growth without triggering the cascading failures that characterize the game's famously punishing difficulty. Population age distribution creates long-term demographic challenges that require proactive workforce planning years before crises actually manifest in the settlement. The minimalist interface communicates all necessary information clearly without overwhelming newer players with excessive system complexity during initial learning sessions. On low-end hardware, the game runs perfectly with essentially no graphical requirements beyond basic display capability. The modding community has produced significant content expansions, adding new buildings, resources, and gameplay systems to the base experience. A masterclass in elegant systems design that delivers enormous strategic depth from a small set of elegantly interconnected survival mechanics, rewarding careful and thoughtful long-term planning throughout every session played. Northgard arrives at 24 as a Viking strategy game with strong medieval atmosphere that blends real-time strategy resource management with territory expansion and seasonal survival mechanics across both campaign and multiplayer modes. The territory claiming system creates meaningful spatial competition during multiplayer matches as players race to control resource-rich regions while managing their own settlement's growth and military readiness simultaneously. Each playable clan has unique mechanics and special units that create distinct playstyles, requiring different strategic approaches to resource prioritization and expansion timing. Seasonal winter cycles force careful food and firewood stockpiling that adds survival pressure to the competitive strategy layer during colder months. On low-end hardware, the game runs excellently, with its stylized art approach being computationally efficient while remaining visually attractive and readable during complex multi-faction engagements. Story campaign missions introduce mechanics gradually, making it an accessible entry point for players new to real-time strategy conventions. A consistently enjoyable and well-balanced medieval strategy experience, with ongoing developer support maintaining active multiplayer communities across competitive ranked seasons. Creaks closes the list at 25 as a beautifully crafted puzzle adventure game set in a Gothic medieval-inspired mansion filled with eccentric creatures and elaborate mechanical puzzles that require observation and lateral thinking to solve. The hand-painted art style from developer Amanita Design is extraordinary in its detail and atmosphere, delivering one of the most visually distinctive experiences in recent indie gaming without requiring any meaningful graphical processing power from the host hardware. Puzzles involve manipulating light sources to transform creatures between their furniture and monster states, creating solutions that feel satisfying and logical in retrospect. The narrative unfolds entirely without dialogue through environmental storytelling and visual sequences that communicate the world's mystery through pure imagery. Sound design and music composition are exceptional, adding significant emotional texture to the already impressive visual presentation throughout the mansion exploration. On any PC hardware manufactured in the past decade, the game runs flawlessly. A meditative and artistically remarkable puzzle experience that earns its place on this list through sheer quality and the memorable impression it leaves long after completion.